God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. A biblical quiz for you. I know it's only a little past 8 in the morning, but I'm going to try your biblical knowledge out here this morning. How many Psalms are there in the Hebrew Scriptures? Anybody know? I won't keep you hanging too long. There are 150 Psalms. And the Psalms are a wonderful collection of basically hymns that were written by the Hebrew people for use in worship in the temple in Jerusalem. And they are a wonderful collection of the whole range of human emotion. They are the prayers sung by the people of Israel to God. Prayers of praise, prayers of thanksgiving, prayers of lament and grief, even prayers of rage and fury. They really cover the whole experience of the human condition. And they're a wonderful way for us to, when we can't find the words to pray, to turn to and read through. And inevitably, you will come across a prayer that fits your situation, because every sort and condition of humankind is contained in the Psalms. And that's how they were used as prayers for the people of Israel, to cry out to God in one way or another. And of course, the most famous of the Psalms is Psalm 23, that is often read at funerals. It's printed on cards. It's beloved of us. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leadeth me beside still waters. You all know that, right? We memorized it in Sunday school. My favorite psalm is the psalm we read this morning, or at least a portion of the psalm we read this morning, Psalm 139. And I love it because there's some very basic understanding expressed in this psalm of God's knowledge of you and me, of God's knowledge of the psalmist. Why don't you turn in your leaflets to the psalm? We'll take a look at it. It starts out saying, Lord, you have searched me out and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You trace my journeys and my resting places, and are acquainted with all my ways. Indeed, there is not a word on my lips, but you, O Lord, know it altogether. The psalmist goes on to say, where can I go then from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I climb up to heaven, you are there. If I make the grave my bed, you are there also. If I take the wings of the morning and fly to the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand hold me fast. There's a wonderful sense that the psalmist gives to us of God's omnipresence, of God's intimate knowledge of us. There's another line in the psalm that says, before I was knit together in my mother's womb, you knew me. Before we were even a creation, God knew us. Someone says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. We can't comprehend it. This awesome reality that God knows us better than we know ourselves. And God continually calls us into relationship with God's self, knowing full well who we are. Our high points of our life and the very lowest points of our life. The fact that we are, in many ways, conflicted people, aren't we? We strive for the good, we yearn for the good, and yet so often we do the evil that we don't want to do. Paul has been talking about this in his letter to the Romans over the last several weeks as we've been reading through that great letter. Paul talks about his own struggle with his nature. Paul says, I know the good, I know what I should do, and yet, day after day, I choose the evil. There is no health in me, says Paul. And yet he continues to be invited by God, who knows him better than he knows himself, into this holy relationship. And there is tremendous freedom in that. There is tremendous gift in what the psalmist is telling us. God knows us better than we know ourselves. And knowing us full well, continues to invite us into holy relationship. What freedom in that. What joy in that. What an invitation. Which makes the story of Jacob perhaps all the more perplexing. Jacob is an interesting character. We've been reading about him over the last several weeks as well. And this morning's portion of Jacob's story needs a little background. Jacob, we discover, is out in the wilderness of Beersheba, and he's on a journey. But this is not a journey of spiritual enlightenment or of Jacob's desire to be one with nature. Jacob is in fact fleeing for his life. Jacob, as you may remember, is a twin. His older brother Esau, who was born moments before he was, is the rightful heir of their father Isaac's property. And in a fit of who knows what, Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentil stew. Obviously, Esau didn't value the birthright very much. He was hungry and sold it. And just before the reading this morning that we heard, Jacob tricks his father Isaac, who is on his deathbed, into receiving the final blessing from his father, which should have gone to Esau. But Jacob deceives his father. In fact, Jacob's name means supplanter or deceiver. Deceives old Isaac into blessing Jacob instead of Esau. When Esau discovers that, he's furious. He goes into a rage. He begs his father to bless him too. But Isaac says, I can't do that. My father's blessing is passed on to only one of my sons, and Jacob has already received that blessing. So Esau is furious. And in a rage, he threatens to kill his brother. Jacob hears this and he flees into the wilderness. And that's where we pick up the story this morning. Jacob is fleeing for his life. And the more we find out about Jacob, the more we kind of question God's wisdom around deciding to create a great nation out of this person, Jacob, who is deceitful, who is a liar, who is a cheat. And yet, Jacob is the one who will be the father of a great nation, the descendant of Abraham and Isaac. It is through Jacob that the 12 tribes of Israel will be created, Jacob's 12 sons. So where is the wisdom in God choosing such a character? Clearly, God knows who Jacob is. The psalmist has reassured us that God knows each of us, including Jacob, intimately. He knows our sitting down and our rising up. He knows the thoughts we have before we even think them. So God knows who Jacob is, and yet chooses Jacob to continue God's plan for salvation, to deliver God's plan for the restoration of creation through Jacob. As we think about that, as we think about God's wisdom, perhaps that's where the wisdom in Jesus' parable that we heard this morning is contained. Jesus is talking about a field of wheat that should produce enough wheat, enough grain, enough flour to feed a whole village. And yet, somebody has come in the middle of the night and sown weeds into this great field of wheat, and in some ways polluted it. Jesus says to his disciples and to those who listen, don't worry about the weeds, focus on the wheat. I think there's some wisdom in Jesus' parable to us as we think about Jacob, as we think about the psalmist, as we think about God's intimate knowledge of each of us. The reality is that there is both wheat and weed in both of us, in all of us, isn't there? We are a conflicted people. As Paul says, we know the good, and it's what we want to do, and yet so often we choose the wrong path. God knows this. Jesus knows this about his disciples, about the people that he encounters, about each of us. We are a divided people. There is good and evil within us. So when we cast our eyes around and look at people and say, there's a sordid folk. There's somebody who's made the wrong decisions. There's somebody who's really screwed up their life. Perhaps instead of judging from afar the decisions someone else has made, Jesus is encouraging us to look within and to recognize in our own selves this conflict that continues on day after day. The psalmist pleads with God, Lord, you know me well. You know that I am conflicted. Lead me in the right way. The evil is within me, I recognize. You see it, Lord. You know my thoughts from afar. Help me to choose the path of righteousness. There's another thing that's been on my mind, and it's a a matter that has come to the attention of all of us in the last several weeks. It's something that has been weighing heavily on me, and it's the flood of refugees from Latin America into our border states down south. Perhaps it's because I'm the father of two children from Guatemala, and I know some of what they left behind. But this situation has really hit my heart hard. And as I've been thinking about Jacob's fleeing into the desert to escape with his life, and also thinking about these children, for so many different reasons, fleeing situations in their home countries that threaten them on a daily basis. It's a complicated situation, and I don't know the answer to the situation down there. Certainly, as a nation as rich and as resourceful and as powerful as the United States, it does seem to me that our response needs to be more than go home. That as a nation that we need to somehow think more creatively, more compassionately, and certainly an initial response to the plight of these children, it seems to me there is something that we need to do. Bishop Knisley has been in communication with the priests of the diocese and has invited us to begin thinking about this together, and inviting us to ask our congregations to also think and pray about this. Bishop Knisley has been in conversation with St. Mary's Home for Children in Providence, which is a long-standing institution here in Rhode Island of the Episcopal Church that serves as both an orphanage and as a place of care and counsel for children and young families. And St. Mary's has been thinking about ways that they might take in some of these children and offer some respite for them, some refuge for them. It seems to me that as a nation, we can't simply turn our backs on this situation, nor can we simply say it's the problem of Arizona or California or Texas. It doesn't affect us here in Rhode Island. We are a nation of states, but we are one nation under God. And in the face of this crisis, again, a complicated situation, it seems to me that we need to think creatively and compassionately about what we can do as a people. I'm reminded of Mother Teresa's great statement in the face of so much grief and suffering in Calcutta, that she said, not all of us can do great things. Not all of us can change the world in the course of our lives. But all of us can do small things with great love. And so perhaps in the face of this overwhelming crisis, there are some small things that we as individuals, as a congregation, and as a diocese, and as a state can do to bring some relief, some hope, some compassionate responses to these young children fleeing so much death and destruction in their own countries. The resolution of the bigger picture will be left to governments to figure out, to our own government and the government of the countries they are fleeing. But perhaps there is something that we can do as a Christian community to aid in this crisis. So I invite you to think about this, to pray about this, to be in conversation with each other and with myself. I don't know what the response will be. I don't know what our governor how he will respond. But I do know that our bishop is looking at the situation, is praying about the situation, and has invited all of us to come into that conversation with him and be people of promise, people of hope, people of justice, first and foremost. So thank you for your attention to this matter. Please be in conversation with me. Please be in prayer about this as we continue on, following Jesus, following in his footsteps, and listening to his call to our baptisms, and to care for God's creation and all of God's lives, today and always.